Years ago, one of my dearest friends, Colin O'Malley, and I got the idea of creating the largest collection of orchestral effects ever done, or aleatoric effects, if you will. In fact, we wanted to be so big that we never had to come back and do it again. And that became the Aleatoric Orchestra, also known as C.A.G.E if you use the contact version of it. I sometimes think about this library as the word emotion, but with the E in parenthesis, in terms of like, yeah, it's emotion, but it's also just sounds in motion. I think it's so important that samples are in motion. No staticness, no just pool of mud just sitting there, but always make sure that the water is flowing, that there's new inspirations and nuances coming through the sounds, and that requires motion. It requires the players to be invested emotionally as well. So emotion and motion sort of hand in hand, if you will. And especially in terms of aleatoric samples, because all the players weave in their own emotions, whatever mood of the day, the bad conversation with the wife, who knows? There's just so much personality in every single note here, and because there's tens of thousands of them, it's a near infinite amount of content. And while I know this library very well and have explored it for many years, I have to say, once we got inside of Soundpaint, it was like a whole new sonic multiverse that just opened up, and here I am, almost starting over again, just being like, holy shit, there is so much beauty in this library, and darkness and gritty textures too. But as you're about to see today, the Aleatoric Orchestra is much more than just like chance orchestra or the random orchestra or orchestral effects in a classic sense. It can really, really be beautiful. Let me draw your attention to the DAW here and just play you one single program I made called Kingdom of Harmonics. And after that, let me just play you a demo I made as well, which is only using sounds from this string volume here. So everything you're about to hear is only made with the strings, except for one mean 909 drum that you can hear a little bit later in the demo. I just thought it could be interesting to try to create a demo in the DAW that was only using this library, so you can get a sense for how far you can stretch the sounds. And obviously all in Soundpaint, so I took all these sound sources, created unique programs that really explored different dimensions of it. So, in the DAW. this demo came to be was essentially just me sort of creating new sounds out of the different parts of the library. And if you look here at the parts directory, you'll notice that there is a lot. Each of these are multi-sample parts. So there's a near infinite amount of content in the library here. You may notice as well that we have high parts here and then we have low parts. The high parts are violins and violas, and the low parts are cellos and basses. And because the library is sort of borderlining between tonal, non-tonal, and somewhere in between, you're going to find them divided into these sort of dual categories here. But let me just go through the individual programs here and then show you how I made each of them and what the sort of idea behind them was and some of the main controls in them too. Beginning here with this sort of very dark, moody beginning. And you probably heard this deep sort of ooh kind of sound towards the end. That's me playing with the pitch bender. If you go into our touch module here, you can define the value of your pitch bender. I set the down motion here to -7, so it really gets that ooh kind of sound. And after that, there's this sort of very short reverse kind of sound. If you notice here inside of the sound mode here, you'll notice that I set this particular part to reverse here, so you get that sort of suction effect to the sound. And that little reverser is followed by a very sort of haunting, dark disco drop, if you will. And that sort of echo feeling is coming from our delay scat, which sort of creates this weird bouncy kind of ball motion to the sound. It's really great as an alternative sort of delay. And then there's this sort of like dark, boomy kind of sound with a riser as well, coming here from a high gliss, long, aggressive tremolos. You'll notice here again, we're in the high category, so high gliss, long, aggressive tremolo, obviously referring to the fact that it's in the high range, but also has a longer kind of aggressive tremolo. I should also mention that there's 3 microphones in the library. You'll notice closed, Decca, and white here. That goes for every single part here, so you have full microphone control, and you can also morph between the mics if you want to go real crazy. And also here on the high gliss, long, aggro, you'll notice that the filter is moving up here. I just right-clicked here and assigned it to my mod wheel. I love doing that, by the way. In Soundpaint, you can right-click on anything and then just move whatever controller on your keyboard, and now you have full control. So it's super easy to build very, very complex modulation matrices if that's your thing. Simply just by right-clicking here, say Add MIDI CC Automation, and now you can control whatever parameters you want here on your controllers. And then we get into this sort of weird, psycho, Herman-like kind of choppy strings. And you notice that dark sound here? Almost sounds like the Batman cape. That's just using the same patch here, but I just played it really, really deep. And that's sort of what I'm talking about when it comes to creative exploration, that you just do what you want to do, but look in all sides of the sonic spectrum. You know, down here, who would have known that a Batman cape would reside in the depths of a high hits pulse cluster chop on a Decca mic? And the high strings are supplemented by sort of a low hit here. And both these parts here are actually a really good example of the multi-sampled nature of the library here. Let me just play some random keys up here with the high notes. I wonder what happens if I take the speed down on these guys. Also really cool when they're sped up. But down here, Let's take something really fast. So it's almost slowed down to like icy still. You can actually freeze the sounds completely. Isn't that wild? So we're slowing down time so much in this short hit here that it actually lasts forever. And then we can speed up a little bit here. You know, that's one way you can explore it. You start adding effects to it and all the madness begins. But the demo continues down here with the deep disco drops. Isn't that a cool effect? So on that one, I first used the disco sort of drop in its normal fashion, but way low here. I play another one here, and because it's so low in the register, and because Soundpaint has notes on every single key, you can play on any range of your keyboard and get sounds out of it. And down here, who would have known that this dark ambience would reside? That's actually the disco drop, but drops so many octaves that we can still hear it, but it's so slow motion. That it almost becomes sort of a hybrid cinematic effect, especially that one down here. Crazy deep. And keep in mind, that's actually with time sped up here. So even though it's so slow, I actually sped up the time to get that fast guy up here. But let's just take that down to normal tempo and listen to it. And all of a sudden, this guy down here is twice as slow, and that's at normal speed. And speed up again here. But below all the darkness is a sonic lotus flower just slowly growing up with all its beauty. Harmonic kingdoms, if you will. I just love this sound here. This one was made by using our glissando harmonics here and then speeding them down in time to get this beautiful ethereal texture, and combined it somewhere between like light and darkness. I just think it's the prettiest sound in the world. Let me try to solo it here so you can just admire it in its own way. And if you notice up here in the beginning, I'm just playing like normal textures, harmonics, and then you'll see that just drop down in octaves here and really create a more sort of elaborate harmonic world. And you can hear how much motion is in the sound here. All the players just doing their aleatoric thing. So pretty. And after that, I sort of added another harmonic tremolo kind of thing, speeding down time here as well for these high textures. Isn't that a cool sound? So if you notice here in the effects, and these are things that you just can't do in Kontakt. First of all, you have full ability to modulate time here. You can even do attack slopes on time, meaning that time sort of slowly modulates down. You can go all the way down to freeze and all the way up to ×2 here. But perhaps more importantly for this program here,
you'll notice that there's multiple modulations going on, both on the filter here, but also on our beautiful shimmer reverb. And again, choose the Add MIDI CC automation function here and just wiggle your controller and you can assign it to anything. So in this one here, you'll notice, and let me just play it again here, how the filter and the shimmer sort of works together. And it just becomes this beautiful star field of sound. I actually thought about Starling the other day, how beautiful that name is compared to what you see in the sky. They're really stars that are linked together. So I sort of thought about the same thing with the star field here. The last part of the composition, if we can call it a composition, is using another patch here of the high gliss harmonics, but this time using distortion on them. And then also, you'll notice up here with the volume, created a little bit of automation using an LFO to sort of create what I can best describe as a side chaining, because I added this sort of aggressive 909 underneath, but I wanted the strings to sort of duck on the 1 and 3s when it comes to the 909, giving this sort of pulsing effect. And if you notice here on the speed button here, it actually moved as well. So I'm toying around with speed and obviously sort of dialing in more distortion as well as it goes on. And then adding this very, very aggressive 909 to the mix as well. Coming from our 909 library, this one is the Extreme Moog Resonator. I sample all these myself because I really think the 909 has a unique profile and ran it through a variety of analog hardware as well. But it's just a really punchy patch. And combined, they sound like... And that's just a couple of examples of how you can let yourself be seduced by the samples. There are many, many different ways of doing it here. And while this might seem a little bit chaotic and all over the place, I sort of like to work with C.A.G.E and Aleatoric in that fashion. Let the samples inspire you, guide you, take you somewhere where you haven't been before.
It's like Soundpaint like stretches my ears. It gives me like supersonic wings that I can fly on air molecules with, if you will. And I yeah, forgive me for my childish like behavior here, but when you go this deep into sound sometimes and you become so humbled and excited again for the re-exploration. You know, we recorded this a while ago. This is back in like 2013, 14, and still to this day go like, holy shit, there is so much stuff in here. It's quite a joy. And speaking of joy, I've also made this other little embarrassing demo using the strings here. And for me, I sometimes like to have the programs and the parts just inspire me. So with this demo here, I was just like, all right, Soundpaint, let me just go through programs. Whatever inspires me, I'm gonna use without any hesitation. And whatever comes out of that, comes out of that. And I don't know what style of music this is. It's probably best described as somewhere between epic music and trap or something. It's very peculiar style. But the one lesson I learned was that humor is sometimes underrated in music. So this demo made me giggle in the process, and can't wait to share it with you. Well, maybe I can't wait. No, I can totally wait to share it with you, actually.
All right, we are in the door. Check out this masterpiece. That's gotta be one of the strangest pieces of music I've ever created. Let's take the track from the very top here. It was actually an old Polyvox synthesizer that inspired sort of the initial groove. And of course, there was also this sort of weird, eerie kind of thing here in the beginning. And that's also the Polyvox, but I actually added that after I did this thing with C.A.G.E. This is the very, very first part of the composition I did, way before the ARP actually. It was just this little strange kind of motif here. And if you notice here, I'm using the offset button on this one here to give it that very sort of artificial attack. I think it's a little further up here. You probably noticed there was a little bit of a sort of deet kind of sound. Isn't that cool? And if you're ever working with the library and you need the timing to be really, really tight, let's say that you want this thing to be faster here, just open my rack legato module and move speed up here. That way it will be a lot more like snappy. Or even super fast. Or let's go in the other direction here, see what happens. I like to keep it for this composition just straight in the middle here. It fits perfectly sort of within the rhythm of the composition. And to me, using the Aleatoric Orchestra, or C.A.G.E. as we call it internally here, really just is about, often, for me at least, to find that sort of percussive quality in the sample where they really fit into the groove of the composition. And for this next part of the composition, the first thing I did was actually, right after this sort of initial crazy theme and little sweep, was to do this thing here with C.A.G.E. And if you notice carefully, you'll notice that I'm using the offset detail here real time. It's associated to my mod wheel, and so is the speed of these sort of beautiful harmonics. And you also got a filter working in the background of that. And to me, that sort of gives, again, that sort of percussive quality, but because we have unique samples on every single key, you can build sort of artificial but yet real sounding grooves, but really have them tight on the grid. I often talk about not working tight on the grid, but when I work on the grid, I like to have a lot of motion in my modulation, meaning that I like to have a lot of small things happening, so it feels more alive, even though it's fairly static and you're only looking at like 3-4 different samples here being re-triggered. But with these kind of modulations here, you can see that it just creates a lot more life in the sample. It doesn't get that sort of machine gun effect. And that's a big thing in Soundpaint about really keeping things alive. Even the engine underneath the hood actually does similar tiny, tiny things. Not as drastic as this, but very, very small things to alter the sound so the engine is always alive. And in this part here, you probably noticed that there are sort of more things going on with the strings. Let me just try to isolate the strings alone here without any of the other ARPs or synthesizers. And as you could hear, things were gradually getting more gated on particularly these sort of screechy long minor trills. And you'll see the modulation of that. Let me just play it one more time and pay attention to the gate here, how it's slowly being opened up on this track here, adding more to that sort of percussive quality. But though things are really on the grid, and even the gate here obviously on the grid as well, there's still that organic quality to it. And if you just add a few other elements to it that may not be fully on the grid, you really get this sort of unique hybrid sound right between sort of what you would expect from a normal orchestra and what you would expect from a computer. And in that part here, let me just try to isolate all the things that are not coming from the strings, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that particular part here, and also using some of our upcoming libraries. For example, our Polyvox, our JX8P, our stopwatch library, which is already out there. So it's a combination of different libraries that are both available and coming very soon. Maybe by the time you watch this video, they're already out. We also got some new cool drum kits here. Let's check it out. And after this passage here, things get a little bit crazy. Now, before we get into that trap part, let me just try to isolate the different components here coming just from the strings. You may have noticed this sort of pizzicato-like sound. Check it out here. It's actually a phrase that sounds like this. It reminds me about John Williams in the first Indiana Jones. He used this sort of beautiful pizzicato spider-like trick. Down with all the snakes and that. And it's sort of very clumsy and dirty in its posture, with other notes emitting sort of randomly, but I kind of like just dug that. And then using these sort of short glissando risers on the Decca microphone. And again, unique samples on every single key, so you can really... Oh, let me just try to reverse them, just for funsies. It sort of has a poltergeist-like quality to it. I don't know what that is. I do remember that I regarded it as a 12 12-bar blues, which I guess it is. So it's the 12-bar trap blues, I guess, leading into something strangely 80s chiptune sounding. And before we even get into that, let me just hold the brakes here on the DX7 bass. This one, obviously the same bass used in Broken Wings by Mr. Mister. And it's so sweet to be able to infuse that, you know, decades later into music. There's still something fabulous about this bass. And by the way, in Soundpaint, when you play even synthesizers that are velocity based, you also get 127 different velocity layers. So if you listen to this bass here, all depending on what velocity I play, I get a more pronounced kind of bass. And all together. And I love this little break here. And I love this little break here and then these sort of deep harmonic textures. And you might have been wondering, like, hey, like, with this whole piece right here, I didn't really hear any C.A.G.E strings. And that's sort of true, but the whole thing actually started with me just creating these sort of random pulsing filter sweeps. You wouldn't recognize necessarily this coming from the strings, but it just shows the power of Soundpaint in terms of being really able to mangle sounds into something wildly different. Right? It doesn't exactly sound like strings, it sounds like a filter pulsing. And we can actually remove that by taking the filter off here. That doesn't sound anything like the filter here, but if you set the cutoff to these sort of parameters here, you can get that sort of swooping kind of pulsing attack percussive effect. And that whole mad part right there is more a combination of using different brass instruments and a few contact instruments that we're in the process of converting into Soundpaint, and really just get the whole thing going here. And obviously, with a very, very dominating Commodore 64 lead here. And you know, this is sort of where Soundpaint also stands apart when it comes to synthesis. We don't use emulations or simulations. We really record things as they actually are. So in this case here, I had two Commodore 64s playing like heavy, heavy vibrato, two different patches together. And it just gives this awesome, like Rob Hubbard sound. So cute. Crazy comments.
Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm really surprised if you made it to this part of the video. Like, forget about those people that just watched the first 5 minutes. Like, you actually made it to this very point, and that's amazing, unless you skipped. Either way, it doesn't matter. I'm so honored to be able to show this to you. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is a 3-parter. We were looking at the string library today, but we also have a brass edition and a woodwind edition. So if it wasn't infinite enough today, it's going to be infinite enough rather soon. This orchestra is eternally deep. So thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next one.